There is a strange kind of silence that almost everyone has experienced. You send someone a message. They respond. You talk for a while. Everything seems normal. But then you notice something. You are always the one who starts the conversation. You stop texting. And suddenly, nothing happens. No message. No, hey. No, how have you been? Just silence. And eventually, you start asking yourself a question that can become surprisingly painful. If I stopped reaching out, would they ever reach out to me? But here's where things get interesting. Because someone who never texts first isn't necessarily uninterested. Sometimes they're protecting themselves. Sometimes they've simply learned a different way of relating to people. And sometimes, they genuinely don't feel the same need for contact that you do. So why do some people almost never make the first move? We tend to interpret behavior through our own emotional logic. If we care about someone, we text them. So when they don't text us, we naturally assume they don't care. But human behavior doesn't work that neatly. Two people can care about each other and still have completely different communication habits. One person may think, if I'm thinking about you, I'll message you. Another may think, I don't want to disturb you. Another, they haven't messaged me, so maybe they don't want to talk. And another might simply think, we'll talk whenever we talk. The behavior looks identical from the outside. But the psychology behind it can be completely different. That's why not texting first isn't a personality type. It's a behavior. And to understand it, you have to look underneath it. One reason some people rarely initiate conversations has nothing to do with the person they're talking to. It may have started much earlier. Some people grow up learning that attention is something you wait for. You don't ask. You don't interrupt. You don't bother people. You wait until someone comes to you. Over time, this can become a social habit. They may genuinely want to talk to you. But initiating feels uncomfortable. There's another possibility too. Rejection sensitivity. For some people, sending the first message creates a tiny emotional risk. What if they don't respond? What if the response is cold? What if they seem annoyed? What if you've misunderstood the relationship? The message itself may take only 5 seconds to send. But psychologically, it can feel like exposing yourself to judgment. So they wait. And waiting feels safer than risking rejection. The strange part is that the other person may interpret that silence as rejection. When internally, it may actually be fear. There is another type of non-initiator. The person who doesn't want to feel intrusive. They think, they're probably busy. I'll let them text me when they're free. I don't want to seem needy. Maybe I'm bothering them. This can create a fascinating psychological loop. Both people may actually want to talk. But both are waiting for the other person to initiate. You think, they haven't texted because they don't care. They think, they haven't texted because they probably don't want to be bothered. So nobody moves. And the relationship slowly becomes quieter. Not because either person decided to end it. But because both people were waiting for evidence that the other person still wanted them there. But we shouldn't romanticize every explanation. Sometimes, the simplest explanation really is the correct one. Some people don't initiate because they don't feel strongly enough about maintaining the relationship. And sometimes, people deliberately wait because they have learned that the other person will always come back. This creates an imbalance. One person becomes the pursuer. The other becomes the responder. And eventually, the pursuer begins doing all the emotional work. Starting conversations. Keeping them alive. Asking questions. Checking in. Repairing silence. Meanwhile, the other person simply responds whenever convenient. This doesn't necessarily mean they're manipulative. But it does tell you something important. Interest isn't only about how warmly someone responds. It's also about whether they ever make an effort without being prompted. Because there's a difference between "I enjoy talking to you" and "I actively want a relationship with you." Those two things can look remarkably similar. Until you stop initiating. Human relationships are built partly on reciprocity. You reach out. I reach out. You ask how I'm doing. I ask how you're doing. You remember something important about me. I remember something important about you. The balance doesn't have to be perfectly equal. But over time, most healthy relationships contain some form of mutual effort. And that's why constantly being the person who initiates can become emotionally exhausting. Because eventually you're no longer wondering, "Do they like talking to me?" You're wondering, "Would this relationship exist if I stopped maintaining it?" That's a much more revealing question. And sometimes the answer hurts. Because a relationship can feel meaningful while you're actively feeding it attention. But become almost invisible when you stop. This is where things can go wrong. You may be tempted to test someone. "I'm not texting them for 7 days. Let's see if they notice." But relationships aren't experiments. And silence isn't always evidence. Someone might be overwhelmed. Busy. Going through something. Naturally passive with communication. Or simply unaware that the imbalance bothers you. So instead of turning the relationship into a psychological game, look at the pattern. Do they respond warmly? Do they remember things about you? Do they make plans? Do they show up? Do they initiate in other ways? Do they seem genuinely interested when you're together? Because texting is only one form of human connection. The real question isn't who texts first. It's, is the effort mutual? So if someone never texts first, don't immediately label them. Their silence could mean fear, habit, insecurity, respect for your space, a different communication style, or simply lower interest. The behavior alone can't tell you which one it is. What tells you more is the pattern surrounding the behavior. Because someone who rarely initiates but consistently shows up for you is very different from someone who rarely initiates, rarely responds, never makes plans, and only appears when they need something. One is a communication style. The other may be a relationship pattern. And learning to distinguish between the two is one of the most important parts of understanding people. Maybe the most revealing thing about texting isn't the message you receive. It's the effort that exists when there is no message at all. Because sometimes people don't text first because they're afraid to reach out. Sometimes they don't because they assume you don't want them to. And sometimes they don't because they simply don't feel the need to. The difficult part is learning which one you're looking at. So the next time you find yourself staring at an empty conversation, don't immediately ask, "Why haven't they texted me?" Ask something deeper. What does the pattern between us actually tell me? Because sometimes silence isn't an answer. It's information. MindDecoded. Understanding the psychology behind ordinary human behavior.